no one was injured. The disaster struck with practically no warning. During the previous 24 hours, certain defects had appeared, but nothing to indicate imminent collapse. More than 2 million bushels of grain. Some of the grain spilled into the lake, and the remainder was buried under thousands of tons of reinforced concrete of which the annex was constructed. Terminal A was the second newest elevator at the Canadian lakehead. Built in 1927, it embodied all the latest technical improvements known at the time. The annex which collapsed was a very large structure, one of 3 adjoining the workhouse. It consisted of 56 large concrete tanks, all clustered together with small bins between tanks, making a total of 220 bins with a capacity of 2,500,000 bushels. It stood on a concrete foundation and 5,000 piles. The building was 375 feet long, 100 feet high, 100 feet wide. Its total dead weight, including the grain, would have amounted to about 150,000 tons, yet it collapsed within seconds. The collapsed material blocked access to the elevator by water, and thus rendered the elevator useless for the processing of Western grain. This film was prepared in order to acquaint you with the tremendous problems which the disaster posed for the company, and to record in a visual manner the various steps by which triumph was snatched from disaster.
Terminal A at Port Arthur has always been an imposing sight. This outshore annex, like the rest of the structure, was built of reinforced concrete and stood on thousands of piles. Heavy, solid, and substantial to look at, it seemed destined to stand for generations. However, fate decreed otherwise, for suddenly the annex was gone. The morning light of September 24th, 1959, revealed this sight, a once fine and valuable structure, now a useless wreck, lying half submerged in Lake Superior. Within a week of the collapse, work began on the task of removing the top layer of rubble in order to salvage whatever grain was still worth saving. Grain that remained above water level had to be salvaged quickly in order to protect it from the elements. Complicating the job, of course, was the mixture of broken concrete ranging from gravel-sized lumps to heavy solid blocks. Nevertheless, 500,000 bushels of dry grain were salvaged. All of the 50,000 tons of broken concrete, which had to be removed, were bonded together by 1,250 tons of reinforcing steel. Nothing about the task was easy. Grain that remained in the lower sections of the broken bins could be handled fairly readily by buckets. Nevertheless, all of it had to be run through screens as the next step in eliminating the concrete. A special type of pneumatic machine designed for handling grain was brought into operation on the site. During the early stages of the work, the loading pipes were run directly to boxcars. While the recovery of useful grain continued without interruption, and as soon as the job could be accomplished, a conveyor belt was assembled to carry more grain and carry it faster right to a main pit of the terminal elevator. The removal of useless grain and material of every sort presented a gigantic problem. Fishing it out of the water was only part of the task, for it still had to be hauled away for disposal. A solution was found by taking over an abandoned gravel pit located about 5.5 miles away, where eventually about 1,500,000 bushels of sodden grain were buried to keep the sour odor from being a nuisance. The work of the shovels and dredges continued alongside the site of the annex until the shipping berth had been cleared to a depth of 27 feet. Temporary storage space for incoming grain had to be sought and utilized wherever available. Here, in the recently closed-down machine shop of the Canadian National Railway's Fort Rouge Yards, Winnipeg, enough lumber to build a large country elevator was used in the construction of a crib to hold the grain, and the result is sufficient storage capacity for about 1.5 million bushels. Similar facilities were utilized at Neepawa, Neudorf, Assiniboia, and Swift Current. Thus, the company has been able to continue service to its customers. Probing by diamond drill continued for some time around the terminal site at Port Arthur in an effort to locate sections of buried concrete and also to bring up samples of rock and undisturbed soil which would help to determine the stability of the terminal and perhaps find an answer to the cause of the collapse. A massive steel retaining wall first had to be built to protect the remaining structure before all the broken bins could be emptied and the site of the annex fully cleared. Then, with the onset of winter, the battle with ice began. Fishing for piles with a power shovel proved a tedious task, but thousands of tips were recovered and subsequently sold to a pulp mill for the manufacture of paper. Since the answers to so many problems lay below the surface, the diver was a rather busy man. Following instructions from the engineers above, his was a task that ranged from examining walls to making repairs and occasionally using a cutting torch underwater. A great deal of the old earth fill supporting the railway tracks had to be removed to make way for a more substantial structure and also reduce the weight against the terminal foundation. Tripods formed of steel H-beams were driven into the ground. These serve as anchors to which were attached heavy steel rods running beneath the terminal to tie back the remaining structure to ensure its stability for the future. The locating of buried piles presented a problem which was readily solved by the use of high-pressure jets of water. All piling which supported the collapsed annex had to be removed in order to prepare the site for the new structure. The driving of piles to create a firm support for the concrete mattress on which the new annex will be built is a basic procedure in terminal construction at the lakehead. Approximately 9,800 new piles will be driven down to rock on the site. A new concrete trestle carrying 6 railway tracks was rushed to completion in order to have the terminal ready for operation at the opening of Navigation 1960, 7 months after the collapse. Since all incoming grain consigned to the terminal must enter over this structure, it was important to get back into business as speedily as possible. Now, with the struggle to reclaim the site almost completed, the entire venture enters a new phase. Plans for rebuilding have long since been fully prepared, and all about the site lies evidence that the plans are rapidly taking shape. The objective is a new annex much larger than the one that collapsed, a new annex that will enable the company to render still better service in the future. Approximately 10 months were needed to clear the site and prepare it for rebuilding. Reconstruction began officially on July 29, 1960. From that date onward, each day saw constant progress made as men and machines worked with lumber and concrete to build a bigger and better terminal. Once the pouring of concrete began, the procedure was almost continuous, as up to 230 men worked week after week under excellent weather conditions to keep the new structure growing. Manual labor is an important factor in the construction of concrete buildings such as this because of the complex pattern of forms being used. Push cart and shovel were standard equipment. Heavier dump trucks would be too hazardous to use. Skilled carpenters experienced in the fabrication of forms for concrete used a total of 39 car lots of lumber. Work on the site of the 3 separate annexes was carried on in 3 stages of development. Here, the outshore site is still in the piling stage, the middle site now has most of the foundation work completed, and the inshore site is covered with a floor containing the forms for casting the huge circular tanks. Working from this control point, the operator keeps raising the floor and the forms as pouring of concrete progresses. Some 380 hydraulic jacks bolted to the floor provide the required lift by climbing threaded rods cast into the concrete. Once the forms begin to rise inch by inch, the pouring of concrete becomes a continuous process, and the finished work is visible below. Each time the floor moves upward, there's room for more and more concrete in the forms, and the heavy labor continues. Upward, upward, and still upward, the concrete structure rises at the rate of 12 or 13 feet per day. In about 10 days' time, the men are working at this level, and there's a substantial building below them. The winter of 1960-61 saw concrete work halted at this stage. However, many parts of the job could still continue, and did throughout the winter months. The center unit was well underway by early summer of 1961. Limited loading facilities had been made available to boats calling for cargo during the previous year. Concrete work on the inshore unit had been completed in March of 1961. With all the 3 units up, there were 45,000 yards of concrete in place. Built along the roof of the first 2 annexes, this shipping gallery is 480 feet long. 1 floor below the shipping gallery is the equipment for loading the 202 storage bins in the new structure. There are also 6 shipping bins. Some 2,800 gallons of paint were required to spray the new structure. The total rebuilding project was finished by December 4th of 1961, a little over 26 months after the date of collapse. Grain boats of any size, right up to the largest, can now tie up beside our terminal. 690 feet of new dock were added during the reconstruction, giving the whole dock an overall length of 1,326 feet. 6 new loading spouts, placed 51 feet apart, make the loading of grain a fast operation. Men on deck swing and direct the new spouts into position over the open hatches. Extension of each spout is power controlled by a simple arrangement of push buttons. Each loading spout pivots at a point 68 feet above water level, and although it weighs 1.5 tons, the spout can be extended inch by inch into position at the hatch. Each spout can handle 40,000 bushels of grain per hour. Since efficiency in loading is a matter of great importance to each boat owner, they are always happiest to take on cargo at the most efficient terminals. In the reconstruction of our terminal facilities, every effort has been made to achieve the ultimate efficiency for the benefit of the company as well as its patrons. The results we have attained will be a source of great satisfaction over the years to come.
Permit me to introduce myself. I am A.M. Runciman. The making of the film which you have just seen covered a period of over 2 years. Towards the end of that time, I succeeded the late Mr. J.E. Brownlee as president of United Grain Growers Limited. As the picture and the task which it records were near completion, before I assumed any responsibility for them as president of our company, I believe it is in order for me to speak freely and to describe the work accomplished as a major achievement of which we are all proud. As you have seen, the outshore annex of Terminal Elevator A at Port Arthur has been replaced and is now back in service. Our success in this respect was achieved primarily because of the foresight, ability, and determination of a large group of people who are an essential part of United Grain Growers Limited. Our terminal facilities at the lakehead now have a much larger capacity than prior to the collapse, and because of the improvements incorporated in the rebuilding, we have a much more efficient plant. The personnel of the company have amply demonstrated their ability to cope with a disaster of this magnitude, and this speaks well for the future of the company. It was largely due to this competence that the company was able to accomplish this triumph over disaster.